Governor, it's really a great pleasure to meet you. And we all know we gather here today, all have this same keyword on our mind, which is fintech. And just now you just gave us a really insightful and interesting keynote on various aspects of fintech, especially in Kenya. I understand that you have just convened the first ever Afro-Asian FinTech Festival. So please tell us more about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be at SOAS University of London participating in this conference on FinTech, which I think will be significant push in understanding how FinTechs operate and indeed what they can do to in terms of economic well-being of our population. So that's interesting, and I think as per your question, you're asking about our first ever Afro-Asian FinTech Festival. That happened in July of this year, and it was co-hosted by the Central Bank of Kenya and also the Monetary Authority of Singapore. So two central banks working together with a common objective. There were some 2,000 participants from more than 50 countries, obviously largely from Asia and Africa in terms of the continents, but 50 countries plus around the world.
Yeah.
And also a whole set of range of participants. So you did have innovators, you did have policymakers, you had people like ourselves on the financial side, you had others on the tech side, so the communication authorities around the world and things like that. And also you had students. We had students from 16 different universities around the world come in. You also had funders, people who are looking to fund various, let's say, projects or various products around the world. There was an exhibition of more than 50 exhibitors in the place.
Fantastic.
So it was quite exciting, but I think the first thing is obviously to see the breadth and, should we say, the diversity of the fintechs that are coming up in Kenya, Africa, and indeed connecting with other fintechs around the world. At the end of it, there was a hackathon, and the winners of that, there are two that will be going to the Singapore FinTech Festival in November, which, as you know, is the biggest FinTech festival in the world. So we are connecting with them, this being the first stop before the FinTech Festival in Singapore in November.
I see.
So in terms of the things that were there, it was an occasion where you had policymakers discuss the issues with other policymakers, and also talk to the FinTech innovators themselves. So in a sense, it was a market in terms of discussions that took place on these issues. The topics were obviously very exciting. Now, it was an important event for both Singapore and Kenya, and we were very pleased to have the event opened or graced by the President Uhuru Kenyatta, President of Kenya, and also we had the senior First Minister of Singapore attend, and represent his country. This was Minister Taman, who also had very good, also participated in one of the sessions. He had a fireside chat, and obviously he had brilliant ideas, which obviously a lot of us and a lot of the people in the audience took, and will obviously be carrying those ideas forward. So that was the FinTech Festival. It will be happening every year, and it's a commitment that is important for the FinTech industry. But it's not just FinTech. It's really all the people that are connected to FinTech.
Right.
So I really think that this will blossom into something really big.
Indeed.
Already it started big. As I said, we had many participants, and the topics were interesting, and there was a lot of ideas that were generated and discussed in the festival.
Right.
So we look forward to that.
Fantastic. This is really exciting, even just listening to it, let alone you were actually there. So I wonder if there were any, there must be a takeaway message. Is any common agreement or message that come out of this festival?
There were many messages, but I think the point here is everyone took home what's theirs. So there wasn't an idea of, or we didn't have the idea that there should be one message.
No.
So in a sense, we've created a platform.
Right.
And it is for those that participated to determine what to take home and what are the messages that they took away and what is it that they'll, how will this go forward with them. But I mean, from my perspective, I think I saw a lot happening. For instance, one of the things that I saw was cooperation amongst the fintechs or innovators. For instance, we had a group. I had breakfast. My counterparty, my peer, the governor of the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and myself had breakfast with something like 50 young innovators that had come to this festival. And we encouraged them to cooperate amongst themselves. And guess what? I was delighted to know that actually they've kept their cooperation. They even created, I guess here you have it, WhatsApp group.
Oh, right, yes.
So they have a WhatsApp group that they are discussing their issues and so forth. I mean, that's one thing that I think for me was a good development.
Right.
Because they'll learn a lot more from each other.
Indeed.
And they're in different places in the world and continent. It's good that they can keep connected in this way. Of course, we also had the hackathon, as I mentioned, and it isn't just the winners. There are two that will be going to Singapore, as I mentioned, and but we also got prizes for 10 of them, meaning the other 10. So they will get mentored in particular ways. And this was to be done by Ant Financial.
Right.
So they are providing...
The Alibaba one.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And they will be providing, let's just say mentorship, scholarship for mentorship of those 10. And the other things that also have, that the others will benefit, even though maybe they didn't get the first prize or second prize and so forth. So it seems to me that those are important developments. Also from the perspective of policymakers. Policymakers, it's important for policymakers to know that they are not alone.
I agree.
So the connection between policymakers is very good.
Indeed.
We had people from around Africa and obviously, as I said, Asia. And I think this was thoroughly beneficial. Finally, funding. We had people there, as I said, that had funds.
Yeah.
Frankly, there was more than 1.5 billion US dollars in terms of the funders that were in the mix in that festival.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure that they saw what they saw, and they will, obviously test what needs to be tested, because it is important to provide funding for those projects that have a high likelihood of success.
Totally.
But I don't think the issue is funding, frankly. I don't think funding is the issue. My view is if you have a good product, it may not be funded, but eventually if you stick with it, it will get funding.
Indeed.
So in the first instance, it may, and this was the issue actually with M-Pesa as well. In the first instance, it had many problems. Funding was not, frankly, the issue because you already had, as I said, you had people that were providing the fund.
Yeah.
But funding should never be the issue in that sense.
Right. Indeed.
But it takes time to have reliable funds coming in. But I think what is more urgent is having a good product that can survive.
And on that note, actually, that links to my next question. In your keynote speech, there are many things I really found very inspiring, and one of them was you saying it's more important to have a clarity of the problem that we need to resolve. And this is exactly what I would like to ask. So we as academic researchers, and you are the governor of a central bank and also policy maker. So we would be very interested to know, in your opinion, what are the most urgent contemporary issues that you think we researchers could contribute to investigate?
Wow. A million questions. A million questions. No, but I think to be truly fair, your interest is also a key driver of what area of research you're looking at. And I think this is typical. I mean, when you write a thesis, for instance, your interest is the first thing. That I'm interested in, financial crisis. So I wrote a thesis on financial crisis, even though there would have been many other topics, right?
Yeah.
You're interested in agricultural financing. So you write a thesis on agricultural because your interest really is an important driver of the outcome.
Totally.
And when things are really hard, it's your interest that pushes you, that keeps, it isn't just a random question.
No.
So that's a point that I wanted to emphasize. But in terms of questions, I think the Baroness had a very specific question. Why is it that some fintech products survive in a particular environment or jurisdiction, but do not survive in another jurisdiction? They do not get traction in another jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Now, the typical answer, if you ask anybody in class, it would generally be, well, the conditions weren't right. And that is okay. So your next question is, what in the world does that mean? Could you unpack it? You don't ask that question. Could you unpack it for us, please? Could you unpack it for us? And then they begin to sort of unpack it. And M-Pesa, for instance, did very well in Kenya, but it hasn't done well at all in South Africa. And South Africa is, by all means, is much more mature in terms of the financial sector and things like that.
Yeah.
It has worked in some other areas. Why is it that even if you compare ourselves, Kenya and Uganda, Kenya is much further ahead, and Uganda is just now, sort of getting off the starting blocks in some sense. So I think these little things one can look at that and understand what are, let's say, I don't want to claim that they are sort of the preconditions, sort of preconditions for growth. Those sort of old papers and statements. I don't think that that's the case. But I think there's a minimum, I would say there are minimum elements that allow the whole thing to snowball.
Of course.
And I think that is what one would want to look at. And maybe those minimums are different from one country to another.
Yes, it should be.
And but I also think that the most important driver for that is need. What is the need that is being applied? South Africa may very well have a much more developed system for, say, using credit cards. We in Kenya, credit cards are not they are not that popular.
No, neither in China.
So now in the US, everything is credit cards.
Yeah.
You even buying tea at Starbucks, you use your credit card. So it's not. So I can see why M-Pesa may not do so well in the US, for instance. But I think the concept can be ported to that jurisdiction in particular ways.
True.
So, but still, what are the areas? That is one question that needs to be dealt with. The Baroness challenged us on that. Other questions, I think, is what are the areas of greatest financial need? Now, this question needs to be refined a little. You see, in my remarks, I did make the point, as you correctly said, that we should not put products, or rather, we should think of products in areas where there is greatest need. So let's first think of what is the problem, what is the need.
Yep.
And I think that's where we need clarity. It isn't just people who are in the financial sector. One of my classic, let's say, areas that I really think there's a huge need is the area of health insurance. Now, for you and me, we have a health insurance package. And if I got sick, I would not go to work the next day and I'll still get paid and things like that. No problem. Maybe the problems come when I have been, let's say, out of my job for a month or 6 months or whatever else it is. But if it is a week, it's not a problem. If it is even 2 weeks, it shouldn't be a problem. But think of the fruit seller that I talked about.
Indeed.
She doesn't have any insurance.
No.
And the insurance she's looking for is not the same package like you and I. Actually, her problem is insurance for 1 day. Meaning, if she gets sick, she wants to be away for a day so that she can go to hospital and not lose her income. That is the issue, which is completely different from me.
Totally.
I can be away for a day and I know I'm not going to lose my income.
No.
So I think the idea there is to figure out what sort of package can work. There are also very exciting things that been done. I talked about agricultural finance. One of the areas here is value chain, value chain financing, up and down the value chain. So those are areas that I think a lot of work needs to be done. The questions are there already. But I think the point here is the interest that drivers are the one is really what is going to be the initial, let's say, we'll point out the areas of initial sort of assessment, or should we say initial inquiry.
Indeed.
Rather than just randomly going, all over the place, all over the map.
No, it is a fairly new area. It's important, but I think we are still lack of understanding along this whole supply chain of finance on various aspects. Indeed, yeah, totally. So the third question is pretty specific. What I've been thinking is it's totally undeniable how important Africa is in terms of as a focus for research in finance, economics, growth, etc. I wonder, but in terms of doing research, of course, we're always being asked what's the implication, what can we learn, why it's important to focus on this. So what I wonder is, in your opinion, what are the important lessons we can draw from studies of Africa, including Kenya, that can be learned by other developing countries as well?
Wow, a lot.
I bet.
Yeah, but I think in sum, one can say every piece of research, if you do it well, will always have a lesson. And it may not be the lesson you are looking for. It may be a completely different lesson. So you could think of, you are hoping there'll be a solution of X in this research, but you don't get that. That may very well be the lesson, because it will lead you to another question, meaning your hypothesis, in a sense, was not validated, was not supported. So that is one lesson out of that, that hypothesis is wrong. So it forces you to think of another hypothesis.
Alternative.
So I think that is the way research works. And I think as researchers, it requires a certain patience, a certain humility, meaning not expecting that whatever you touch turns into gold. In the old story. And it requires a lot of hard work, discipline, and so forth.
Definitely.
Not different from being a marathon runner. Those are fundamental qualities of a good marathon runner.
Yes, indeed.
So I think it's important to appreciate that. But having said that, there are some specific questions that for me are interesting. Now that I've been looking around Africa for a few years, not as much as you and others in SOAS. They've been researching these topics for decades, and so in that sense, what I'm going to say, I say it with a sense of I would say humility, that maybe what I'm going to say is absolutely wrong, and
there's no right or wrong.
The one area which I think is interesting is, in my view, and now we are talking on these things. I have always found it fascinating, this whole business of network effects. Okay, I talked about it in the context of some of the things that that made them pesa and so forth. But I think part of it, the precondition for that was because of the, let's say, the social situation that we had. Meaning our social, we depend on each other quite a bit.
Yes.
So we support our parents. We support our families. You think of remittances, for instance, that have been sent to Africa and so forth. The remittances are to support our family, you know, the immediate family and other extended family. And that actually is significant to understanding the growth of remittances and also the development that is causing.
Indeed.
One of the things that through these let's say products that fintech products that are coming through, it has made it much easier to actually send remittances of low value, right? So, for instance, and I know this is happening. This is a true story. So this person gets called by her nephew, and her nephew is somewhere in Africa. I won't say the country, and she is in the U.S. And so this is a WhatsApp call. It's very cheap, not the regular call. WhatsApp call. And their nephew says, "Oh, you know, auntie, I have this problem. I need some money." And so auntie sends, "Okay, fine, I'll send you something. Here's $20, $20 only." And then she switches to the other app. They're still on WhatsApp, but she switches, sends the money, and still on the call, you can hear the ding as the money hits
the other side.
The other side.
Gosh.
Now, that could not have been possible without fintech, without the fintech sort of revolution and things like that. The cost of that, and for her, $20, it means, well, maybe I'll give up, let's say, my lunch or something like that. You know, she can afford it. You know, in that sense, right? What am I saying? This sort of network effect or networks, or social network, I think are critical for the way Africa runs. And that is one thing which is fundamentally different from, say, how the advanced economies work.
I agree, totally.
And there has to be many pluses from that. And should we say we need to benefit more from understanding, or let's say leveraging on that, or as much as we can. That's one huge element. The other element, which I think is, again, from Africa, I think the issue for me is we are very much, let's say, agricultural based.
Indeed.
And for the most part, smallholder agriculture. So the question is the benefits from the way to develop smallholder agriculture is completely different from, say, the way that we need to push, you know, large scale farming in, I don't know, the US or other places, right? And we are talking about, say, I talked about less than 2 billion people who are still excluded. A lot of those are in agriculture. And, okay, you do have some urban, let's say, urban workers that are excluded from that. But I think that are included in that number. But I think a lot of them are in the agricultural sector because, for instance, in Kenya, 70% of our population derive their livelihood from agriculture. So what lessons can one learn from improving that? I think is significant, and one needs to understand. Then there's another one which, as I say, we can go on forever. But this other one, actually, I think it is quite important, which is how small effects can have large effects, or small items can cause significant improvements. Quite often, NGOs or ourselves, policymakers, look at the sort of direct effects. And the direct effects they may be small. But if you look at the indirect effects, they could be substantial. Indeed. Particularly if you are looking at social change. Okay? And I'll give you a very simple example. The example of the lighting in homes.
Oh.
Now, many homes, many poor households, they derive their, let's say, light at night energy from lighting energy from a kerosene lamp.
Oh, okay.
Now, it's very expensive, kerosene. And secondly, the kids cannot study because you only have one little light and it is in the entire house. And so when lights go off, when the sun goes down, the kids cannot really do their homework.
No.
So now we have this sort of possibility of having the solar panels, and actually one of the interesting solutions is by a company that is called M-Copper, and this also showed their products at the Fintech Festival. So they give you, or you get one or two panels, solar panels, and this is sufficient to run 4 light bulbs, a refrigerator, and a radio, actually a TV also, and a light bulb. And a flashlight.
Right.
Now, that means that household actually, and they can use the light right through the evening. So that household will be transformed.
Indeed.
Not only because they have light which the kids can now study. So that is significant. You can imagine the benefits to the education, quality of education to the kids, and even other things. The family now can buy milk or meat perishables and put them in the fridge without much problem.
Yes. Yeah.
As opposed to not buying them because of, these things will perish and so forth. So the indirect effect of that very simple project of having solar panels can be truly transformational.
Entirely.
And that, I think, is what we have, in our studies also, I think we minimize a lot the second effects. The indirect effect,
Totally.
the second order effects.
Yeah.
And I think I'm just making the point that the second order effects that we have seen in various places are huge. And we need to, and therefore there's a significant multiplicative factor.
Indeed.
That would actually cause the benefits to explode rather than to remain small.
Indeed, especially such development is in a sustainable way.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's something probably in a more advanced economy, it's harder to harness or develop compared to a country like China or Kenya who start from scratch in certain area. It's much easier to adopt the newest technology. With the idea of sustainable growth on mind. This is exactly what I was asking about. This lesson can be learned in one country, but it's important for many other countries with similar conditions in certain aspects. So thank you very much, Governor. I totally enjoyed listening to your keynote and have the privilege to have a chat and interview of you. So thank you so much for your time.
Very good. Thank you very much. I enjoyed this, and I really appreciate being invited here and delighted to share some of our thoughts with your listeners. I look forward to participating more actively with the researchers and students at the University of London SOAS going forward. But it's grateful. I'm very happy to be here in this environment. Thank you very much.
It's great to have you. Thank you very much.